Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. The show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon area. For your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is we have decided to talk about this evening. And my guest this evening is Marc Kohler again. And
thanks, Tom.
How you feeling?
Great.
And so am I. Are you nervous?
Nope. You always make people very comfortable.
Yeah, but you guys make me nervous.
All right, that's good.
That's my standard work into. After a minute or so, then I calm down. So we're going to be talking about make a political revolution. So Marc's going to be talking to us about how to make a political revolution and what that means, and we'll have a bunch of questions about that, and it'll unfold here. He's running for Congress again, and he's got a whole history of other activities in the New York area on the East Coast, which says he's interesting enough and smart enough to challenge Earl Blumenaur for his seat, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see how the bio stuff. So when and where were you born?
Actually, I was born on a chicken farm just north of New York City, and lived there till I was about 4, and then my parents moved us to Long Island. So.
Anything significant about born on a chicken farm?
Well, it's strangely enough, it's an interesting, where you have your first experiences, where your first inputs in your life. I think it has a lot to. I still, at night, sometimes you listen to the crickets, and I miss the farm. Just
really?
Something that I always sort of felt a close attachment to.
Yeah. How long were you there?
Just till I was 4, but we stayed very close to the family that took the farm over from my father. So we stayed up there for a while.
Yeah. You have any difficulties with fried chicken or?
No, but I did get scared. Ran into the chicken coop with a water gun when I was about 3, and realized that's not a good thing to be squirting chickens. So they came after me. I never went back into the chicken coop after that. I had about 5,000 chickens, so it was a good size operation.
Serious chicken farmer.
Yeah, my father wanted to be a farmer, but married a New York Jewish woman who Long Island was the Mecca in those days,
Yeah.
So didn't want to pluck chickens. So anyway, that's the beginning. And stayed on Long Island until I went to college. My parents moved away when I was in college, and really never went back to Long Island after that.
Why were you born?
It just was one of those things I had no say in. I tried to, to avoid it, but there I was.
I thought you had unusual powers,
That's right.
With what your history shows you've done in your life to date. You'd probably be capable of doing anything you decide to do.
Well, as they say, a long, strange trip it's been, So,
yeah.
Growing up the time I did, in the late 60s, and, the Vietnam War coming, and, the whole peace, love generation, and, the counterculture, and so many crazy things were going on at that time.
Were you a part of that craziness?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get a high number in the first draft lottery, Vietnam draft lottery. I was prime meat, and when I didn't have to think ever about serving, although I did think about it, I was accepted into the Air Force as a pilot, but the Vietnam War was not something I wanted to be involved in. And it gave me the opportunity, quite honestly, to leave school and experience sort of the counterculture world for a number of years until I decided to sort of rejoin the human race and get back into college and finish my degree and, get on with raising a family and all that kind of stuff.
So let's continue with my questions to be sure we don't leave anything out.
Yes.
Anything significant or unusual about your cultural heritage, racial?
Well, my parents are Jewish. My father spent the entire World War II over in Europe. He spoke fluent French. He was there the day after the invasion as a translator in France. And you grow up with an understanding or a belief that in what they were doing was the right thing for the world, saving the world from fascism. And I think I never lost that sort of connection to that there is evil in the world, and you have to stand up for it. So I think I've carried that through my life with that kind of understanding.
So what does that transfer to nowadays? Social justice or those kinds of things?
Well, I think we were just talking a little bit beforehand that it's hard to not talk about the current administration, because that's really what is driving so many people now to get engaged, get in politics. People like me who never run for office before. And, when we had, Clinton, we had Bush, we had Obama, we had, in my lifetime, we had, this collection of presidents that coming in and out. It never really seemed to make much of a difference which party was in charge. Yeah. Now we have a situation that is unlike anything I've seen in my lifetime. And I think it brings back that time that, now if we really care about what's going on in the world, we can't sit on the sidelines anymore. I don't care if you're, 75 or, 35. It's the time to get engaged and to really stand up and speak your values and defend this country against what I think is a man who really wants to be I would call him a fascist. By any definition, he certainly appears like he wants to be.
Are we moving toward a new norm in our culture, in America's existence, a new norm with Trump and Trumpenstein?
I think what he's done is pushed people to pay attention. People like, even just listening today to Cynthia Nixon, the one who's running for governor in New York, who I don't think she would ever have gotten involved in politics if it weren't for Trump. That anxiety about, you just can't sit there and let this happen. And I think maybe that is what the new norm is going to be. Maybe it's going to be, the young people saying, like all the kids from Parkland saying, I'm not going to sit and take it. I'm not going to vote for you if you don't do what's right anymore. We just sort of, we had less than 45% of the population even voted in the last election. I think that's going to be much different this next, 2 years from now when we have to go to vote for president again. I think the
new norm would be to have fewer and fewer people voting and saying it's okay to not do anything.
Yeah, I think much more. I think people are going to get much more engaged until the country returns to what they believe that this country should really be about.
I hope you're right. Yeah. Religious preference, you mentioned that before, because I was a Roman Catholic kid, ultra boy for years and years, and I have memories, even some fond memories of those early years. I know what it's like to have a religious orientation and being brought up with it.
Well, I never really had any. My parents were both raised Jewish, but when they, after the war, when they got married and got together, they really didn't put any of that. But culturally, I'm kind of like a Bernie Sanders. We both grew up in New York and Long Island, Jewish parents, but never really practiced. I was never bar mitzvahed and never went to any of the religious training. And so, culturally, you are who you are. But as far as any particular religious orientation, I don't really consider myself aligned with any.
Any cultural things associated with the fact that you're Jewish?
Yeah, I think it's, it's silly to say this, but I still enjoy reading the Sunday New York Times. I don't think that's not. It's almost like a cultural thing.
Anyone who doesn't is really got a problem.
Well, you got a bagel and you sit Sunday morning and you read the New York Times, and there's some things like that almost feel cultural rather than, ingrained in who I am. So.
Yeah, and you've got a long history with your education system. You started, from your memory at least, talk about your education through the years, your education.
Well, I graduated high school at 16, so I was very
16,
young. Yeah,
right.
I had skipped a grade and got out at 16, and for whatever reason, they thought I was bright. A big mistake on their part, but. And then so by the time I was 18 years old, I'd already finished 2 years of college. And
your modesty is sickening.
Well, that's why I didn't mind so much about actually taking. I took basically 4 years off, after, like I said, when I got the high lottery number, I hung around for a while, did some things, ran a health food store, moved out to San Francisco, wound up going to City College San Francisco at a time when, strangely enough, colleges were free in California.
So that was a long time ago.
Yeah, so I went, got to get a year and a half, 2 years of schooling in San Francisco, and then wound up coming back and finishing the degree where I started in industrial education. And over the years, because I was in corporate America most of the time, I had some tuition reimbursements from my employer.
Sure.
So I did a fair amount of graduate work, human resource development. I did a management science, worked on a degree in management science, graduate degree, and but most of it, my career was in training and development in corporate America.
Mm-hmm. So you're a corporatist, huh?
Well, I raised a family, One of the sad things, and also one of the things that really inspired me to get involved in politics now, was that I really looked back on 30 years or so of working life and realized that I'd never done anything, quite honestly, of value. All the companies I worked for were just making money generally for the stockholders and for the corporate elite, and you were just a soldier doing what you were told to do, whether you were a VP or you were a manager. You still were you were never treated as having any value and not doing anything of value.
What do you mean by value?
Doing things for people, doing things that can help people. Making more money for the founder of Reebok was not something that has any great social significance.
But you did it for a while.
Yeah, you do it because you got a family, you got a mortgage to pay, you got insurances to pay, you got electric bills and oil bills and car payments and car insurances, and you look back and you say, well, I've worked for 30 years, but never for me. I worked for the banks, I worked for the insurance companies, I worked for the oil companies, I worked for the utilities. That's who I worked for. They allowed me to live in my house and they allowed me to have a fairly comfortable life for most of the time. But, I almost feel like you're not given the opportunity to, unless you, leave that environment, go work for some nonprofits and then that's really what happened to me a number of years ago when I moved out here from Oregon.
Are you a closet socialist?
No, I don't think I'm a closet socialist. I'm right out there.
I knew it was coming.
It's a term that people, will want to throw around and make whatever they want of it. But, because you care about social values, you care that the government has a responsibility to take care of its neediest people. If that's socialism, sure, I believe in it. I think there needs to be controls on the amount of executive compensation in corporate America. I think capitalism is completely out of control. I think that there should be also controls on the banks and the financial institutions. And, there's so many things wrong with how our country is operating. And it isn't just the president. He's going to be gone in a couple of years in all likelihood, and we'll have another, somebody else that we'll have to defeat. But, I think the institutions that we live in and that we need to have improved the lives of our citizens. That's really where we need to focus, I think.
The CIA hooked into us tonight? How many lists are you on, Marc?
I'm
on a bunch of them, probably.
I had an experience years ago when I was, like I said, during the Vietnam War, I was a pretty heavy protester. I got involved in a lot of protests, shut down the draft board and a few other things. And a couple of years later, like 10 years later, I found myself working for a defense contractor. That's where the jobs were.
Yeah, I've been there.
And I went for a secret clearance, and they showed me that they had a file on me. They had a big, long file, and Nixon was pretty paranoid, And so you realize that they're watching you. I'm not wrong. I have nothing to hide, I didn't do anything. I didn't, blow a bank or anything.
It's a different world nowadays. Be careful. I think we've got some people looking at you more closely. Which reminds me, I was thinking about what's been going on in my life now because I reapplied for my passport. I hadn't done anything for 10 years.
Oh.
And then I thought, boy, what are they going to find on me now? So I'm waiting to hear feedback to see if they found something.
Well, they're going to let you out of the country. They may not let you back in.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth going out of the country somewhere. But anyhow, so we talked a little about your work. Anything more about your money earning capability and raising a family and having to work?
I made a decent living. I never made a lot of money. I never was really focused on that part of it. It was just, support a family, pay the bills, and then, sooner or later you start looking around, like I said, and saying, well, I have good years left. I want to use them for doing something that I think is important. And so I live on Social Security now. I got myself in a situation where I can live, and it's really tough. I mean, I was lucky enough to make enough money over the years that I kind of maxed out the Social Security, and it's not a healthy income to live on by any stretch.
Of course.
But I'm never going to have to get a blue tarp, hopefully, and sit on the side of the street where so many elderly people, and not just elderly, are doing that in this city. Where I'm working with a group out in Gresham, senior citizens who are living, some of them, mostly women, who are living on, $1,100, $1,200 a month, and their rent is going up to $650 a month.
That's a Gresham here in Oregon. Gresham,
yeah. And how are you going to do that? So what you do is you get rid of your car. You take half your medicine because you can't afford your medicine. You eat badly, so you have bad health problems because you can't afford to eat well.
When you win the congressman's seat, what will you do about those kinds of things you're talking about right now?
Well, one thing I've already been working with, I don't know if your viewers may know Dan Meek, but
Dan Meek, he's beautiful.
He's really a very effective lawyer, and he's helping me draft a bill that I would try to introduce that basically says, without getting into all the gory details, but if over 90% of your income is derived from fixed income, that your landlord cannot raise your rent more than the cost of living adjustment.
You're talking about Oregon, the state of Oregon.
In Oregon, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I would like to propose it as a federal law, not just as because that's one of the opportunities you really do have that's different than running for like a governor or a city councilor. You have an opportunity to introduce bills on a national level. And I know how difficult it says, you can't get any bills passed. I get that too, but it doesn't mean you don't try. It doesn't mean you don't push the agenda, rather than just, we can get into it whenever you want, but the person that I'm competing with is just a good quality Democrat, a good corporate Democrat.
How can that be a good corporate Democrat? The way the Democrats
according to
the
the Democratic Party, yes, he's one of those reliable votes. That he's more on the liberal side. He cares about marijuana reform, and he's not a terrible guy. But we need people to do more than just not be a terrible guy. Bernie Sanders' group talks a lot about just blue won't do anymore. It's not enough just to be a good Democrat. That's not going to change anything.
Are you a radical?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's fair to if I'm not going to do it now, I'm certainly not going to do it some other time in my life, right? You got to stand up. I mean, if you're not out there working it doesn't make sense to run.
Yeah, for so many years during the civil rights era, I was feeling guilty because I was working in the aerospace industry at the time before I went back to school, and working on missile systems and detection systems and all that kind of stuff. And at the same time having my leanings like I should do more. And particularly in the civil rights era, I should have been out there on the streets with Martin Luther King and that sort of a thing, but not want to jeopardize my secret clearance and like that. So back and forth what to do,
It is hard to just. It's like I was talking to some people yesterday about the LNG terminal that they're proposing, in the state, and how the environmentalists are really against it, and I understand
LNG
that
meaning liquid natural.
Yeah. Basically, they're taking fracked gas and going to create
natural gas,
the largest terminal
liquefied
in the
natural
country.
Gas. I forgot.
And the unions are really supportive of it because it's going to be, 1,500 jobs for maybe 3 to 5 years. And it's hard to say. We know we're hurting the environment. We know we're doing something that we for the good of the planet we shouldn't be doing, but where are the good jobs? Where else can I get these jobs? So it's not enough to just condemn those people who are taking those jobs, and I don't, but there has to be alternatives. If you want to stop the destruction of this planet, you have to provide meaningful work for people to do, and I think that's another job that in Congress we can have an effect on. We can change the priorities of where does our federal monies get spent on infrastructure. Should we be building liquefied natural gas terminals, or should we be building alternative energy systems? I think, for instance, the Clean Energy Initiative here is, just a fabulous piece of legislation that'll probably be, I'm very supportive of it, and I think it will pass. And it'll be a model for the rest of this country to say, you don't have to rely on those old fossil fuel. We've got to think about how do we end that. And we end that by replacing it with alternative systems and alternative sources of energy. And I think we can really do that as a national priority.
And you can have jobs for those industries, those new industries.
Yeah, I mean, like for instance, it's very clear that whether it's in yours and my lifetime or not, but there's no question that we will have self-driving cars in this country. We're killing 40,000 people a year and maiming hundreds of thousands of more in our automobiles.
I think you're going too far out for me, self-driving cars.
That's what I said. It'll take a while to transition.
A long while.
Okay. In the next 5 to 10 years, absolutely, there will be long-distance trucks will be driverless.
Yes.
Uber and cabs will be driverless. There will be, it's a transition that will happen. But all I'm bringing that up is because it's clear that there will be jobs along with those. It'll change the nature of jobs. Yes, taxi cab drivers will almost always, some of the long-distance truckers will have to look for other jobs. But it also will be technology involved in creating those systems and supporting those systems. So it's a shift of jobs. My first job, I was a draftsman, pencil and, and
I went through that stage.
It was very clear that job was not going to continue. I worked for a company that invented the electronic cash register. NCR, you say all those big ones. Well, there's no typewriter repairmen don't exist much anymore either. So jobs will continue to transition. We can't just say, well, we want to keep the jobs we have. We have to continuously invest in the new jobs and the new
kids don't know what you're talking about. NCR, National Cash Register.
That's right, National Cash Register. Right. I don't even know what IBM stands for either, but
it's National Business Machines, right?
Yeah. So.
We're telling our age here.
That's right.
So what do you do in your spare time? We don't have any spare time with running for Congress.
The next 7 weeks or so will be pretty busy. But other than that, I'm also, when I first, I guess you could say, retired, I started getting back into my first love, really, which is being an artist. And I'll continue to do that as well.
What kind of an artist?
I've been doing stuff since I was 18, 19 years old. I worked with a gallery in New York for a while and realized that I had no interest in being a struggling artist in Manhattan. So there's lots of them. And I didn't have the confidence in myself to say, I'm going to dedicate myself to this and cut off my ear if I have to. I wasn't that kind of an artist, but when I was able to sort of relax and think about just enjoying my life a little bit before I decided to get into selection. I was going back and doing some of that. I've had a couple of shows here in Portland, and maybe when my political career has ended, I'll go back. Georgia O'Keeffe, again, showing our age. She started when she was about 80, I think. So there's still time to do that as well.
What kind of satisfaction does that give you, doing art and paintings and those kinds of things, and being involved in that whole effort?
Well, it's funny. The creative act, it's the only thing that I would ever, in all likelihood, will leave on this planet, is the things that I create, whether it was my children, right? And I can create things that are unique to me. No one else would ever do what I can do in that creative. And when you can get in touch with that singular activity that is just yours, and then try to share that with the world. Whether people like it or not is not the point. But creating it, the creative act is what really gets me. It's just very satisfying to do that.
What comes to mind right now, kind of digressing from what we're talking about, is I go to the gym regularly, and the hot tub is one of my favorites for various reasons, of course, with my aging body. And I find I'm feeling guilty because I'm not rehearsing my singing lessons and my voice training. I don't have enough time with my political activity.
Well, that's one thing I am never going to do. So you're never going to catch me at a karaoke machine.
I find in the hot tub, I will start singing a song that I'm supposed to be working on at home, which I don't take time. But then it's something about the hot tub, the hot water, and takes the pressure off of my insides. And next thing you know, I'm checking the clock, and I've been there 20 minutes, and I'm supposed to be in there 10 minutes, right? But there's a certain feeling.
Yep.
It's hard to describe, a certain satisfaction. And I think that's sort of like what you're talking about when your involvement in art. It's a personal thing.
Yeah, it's like I know some people are very serious runners. It's the same thing. You know, it's almost the most important thing in their life. Is that's where they get that satisfaction, that getting in touch with who they are. You know, so. But anyway, that's like you said. We digress.
And I love digressing with you. And what I'm thinking about, I was wondering before we started this evening. I think Marc will realize that I've been to a couple of events where you were addressing the group about your candidacy, and then occasionally I'll ask you a question that's provocative. It's designed to provoke you and have something more coming out of you than what you've been delivering until that moment. And I think if you will recognize that I am provocative for a number of reasons, that it isn't that I hate you, it's just not trying to stump you. But when I look at you and see your eyes, I said, I don't have to tell you that, because I'm just being that way because I like you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate those kinds of questions. I want people to ask me what do I think? Why would I like people? I like when people say to me, "Why in the world would you run against Earl? You can't beat him." I like the question.
Okay.
What would you do if you won? What good would it be to have an independent? So those are all questions I want people to ask. In some ways, yes, it was kind of egotistical of me, if you will, for starting at where I started with no political background and no campaign money and no name recognition, and realizing that there's little chance of having an impact. But I think it was really important to say that yes, that we have a guy here who has for the last 20 years has not been challenged at any level. Because he comes from an area that is so heavily Democratic, the Republicans barely even, the guy who's running as a Republican got 103 write-in votes, and he's on the ballot for that. So, we're not giving him a big chance in terms of anything either. But they have a right to do that, and I support all candidates from getting up and saying their piece. There's a libertarian on the ballot, there's a Constitution person on the ballot, and I think it's, Earl should be forced to say, well, why do you support trade policies that hurt American workers? You shouldn't just be able to ignore the question. Why is it that you take 95% of your campaign dollars from big corporations and PACs? Just explain to us. Why did you vote for Hillary as a superdelegate when your district overwhelmingly wanted Bernie to be the candidate for president? Why should they support you if you don't support what they want? Just because you're a Democrat, you're going to win, so that's all you should have to do is to just show up. And I don't think that's right. I don't think that's the way democracy is supposed to work.
Do you think he'd probably respond by calling you a communist or something?
No, because he and I, strangely enough, agree on a lot of things.
Of course.
So. And it's not about attacking him. He's not the worst guy in the world that we have to get rid of him, but we should be moving on. He's done his service, his lifetime service. He's never worked in the private sector, as far as I know. He's always been public service. Good for him. He's tried really hard to do what he thought was best, but it's not what the people want anymore.
Well, let's finish with this part.
Sure.
And
I digress too a lot.
I love it. That's my job, to keep you in some sort of control.
Okay.
And I love digressing too. And your family, your wife and children. You mentioned you.
I have an ex-wife. She's back east. She lives in the same town as my younger son. They live in Woodstock, New York. My younger son is a very successful drummer in a heavy metal rock band. Travels around the world. He's got a beautiful wife, 2 beautiful kids, and he's having a great life. And I'm very jealous of him sometimes. But and my older son lives here in Portland. He's on disability, mental health disability. So I have a personal engagement in that whole process, and we could just talk about the mental health problems in terms of services and all levels. It's a crime. He's been actually told by the state that to not work, because if he makes $12 a month more, he won't be considered poor anymore. He'll go over this threshold, so he'll lose his Medicaid and his co-pays on his, so it's like they force you into this situation where you can't get out of poverty, So, but anyway, like I said, that's a whole nother challenge. But he's a good guy. He has his challenges, but he's doing very well.
Good. Does he like you?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think the biggest fear in his life is that one of these days I'm not going to be around. So.
Okay, one or two more questions. Persons from the past or alive today that you admire or look up to besides Bernie Sanders?
Past or
either way.
Currently alive?
Yeah, either way.
The first person I remember really on a personal level was I was born during when Eisenhower was president. And actually Truman was president when I was born. I didn't want to say that because then I'm really going to know how old I am. But there was a time when I thought that a general was the kind of person we needed because their job was commander-in-chief of the most powerful military force in the world. Mm-hmm. So who else would you want to to be the president than someone who comes from a military background? In the same way, I was always impressed with John Glenn. Military background, but since, we go back to Clinton, really, when we've had, quite honestly, draft dodgers, if you will. I don't know how else to put it. We've had people who didn't serve, and yet they're, and I can't go back to it, but we've got a madman in charge of our military. It's just crazy.
Well, you can forgive him because he has a personality disorder, narcissistic.
He has multiple personality disorders. How could I think that's a problem with our Constitution that we have this situation. I understand civilian oversight.
How about alive today? Any persons alive today that you admire or look up to?
Yeah, there's quite a few people. I mean, you look at. Believe it or not, I'm a fan of Jerry Brown, California.
So am I. Moonbeam.
I was always hoping that he was going to marry Linda Ronstadt. I just thought that was going to be a kick in the White House.
Yes.
But I like him. I like his way of being.
Jerry Brown. Anybody else?
Yeah. If you look at some of the, unfortunately, not very many politicians to look up to.
Yeah.
You look around, even the ones who are vying to be the Democratic nominee, the ones who are really pushing out there, Booker, there are people that are really pushing, and I just don't know if those are the people that I really want to see in the White House. I'd really like to see like one person I really respect is Merkley, a senator here. I think he would be a really viable candidate to be president of the United States.
What's his full name?
Merkley, our senator.
Yes, of course.
So I think
for people who don't know, he's a senator from
Oregon.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I didn't know we were on a national basis here. I thought everybody knows.
We are seen all over the world.
Oh, I did. My God. So I started speaking in French too.
So they're going to yell at me if we don't take a break here before we go into some other stuff. Let's take a couple of minutes break.
smoky down there.
Yeah, well, we're back, and thanks for staying tuned. For your viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and you are unique. And we'll be talking about what it is that we're talking about, making a political revolution. And we're going to get to more of that, what you mean by make a political revolution. I think you're alluding to it and talking around it, but maybe we can start out by talking about a few more words about making a political revolution.
Okay. Well, I picked that up. Obviously, I didn't create that. That's a Bernie Sanders statement. And it really does sort of, hopefully gets people to think about, well, what are we doing here? What are we trying to do? We're not trying to just have the Democrats take over the House. Well, they've been in charge of the House before. The Republicans have been in charge before. The senators,
But there are different Democrats now. We're looking at if I embrace the Democratic Party again, it's got to be radically different than it's been for the last 10 years or 12 years.
Yeah, you're starting to see that effect. The election in Florida, the election in Massachusetts, the elections in New York. The old line 10-term Democrats are not winning their primaries, and just like. If Earl were really confronted with a true progressive that had backing and had money, and I think he would be very susceptible to lose. I didn't run as a Democrat in the primary partly because of the way the laws are here in Oregon about the sore loser law. If you lose in the primary, you're done, and no one was going to beat him. Certainly didn't. Maybe if I'd started 2 years ago and raised $1 million, I would have had a chance. But not having that opportunity, I thought the only way really, and it's not just because I didn't want to run in his primary. I also believe very strongly that the time and place may be right now more than any time, maybe even since World War II, to bring an independent into the U.S. Congress. And your viewers may know that there's only been one in the U.S. Congress since World War II, and that was Bernie Sanders in 1990. Mm-hmm. So you basically were told who you're going to be able to elect. You were going to either able to elect a Republican or a Democrat, and the two parties will pick those people that you will be able to. So where's your choice? You are told what choice you have.
So the political parties do not have room for independent thought.
No, but the good news for me, and I thought about here, and that's why I really decided to run here, was because there is no Republican to worry about. The Democrats, they all say, oh, we can't split the vote. Jill Stein cost Hillary the election, all this other stuff, so you can't vote for third party because it's going to, give the, well, you're not going to have that happen here. There is no opportunity for a Republican or a, libertarian to win. So don't worry about that. So think for a minute. Just try to think for a minute. What do you really want in Congress? Do you want just the same old Democrat we've always had? Or do you want someone who, as you said, is going to make a political revolution? You send one independent to the U.S. Congress, a progressive independent with no background, no experience, and no money, and you bring that and you elect that person to the Congress, the country's going to go, holy shit, well, how did that happen? So, yeah, well, I didn't... That was a fairly calm,
I know.
But we'll be more careful. That's right.
Thank you.
I don't see that as
no,
too bad.
Not.
See, I grew up in New York, so you get through that. But
my wife yells at me all the time for swearing too much.
But I think that's really when you talk about a political revolution, that's really what it's about. It's changing the game, not just change some of the people here and there. You really want to make a change, you stand up and you say, no, we're not going to just sit back and take the guy that they've told us we can vote for.
So aren't you going to need to do something about the unequal distribution of wealth?
Oh, there's so many things to do. Yeah.
How are you going to do that?
Well, I'm not by myself. It's the American people that will get together and say, yes, we are going to, we now have a citywide ballot measure about campaign finance reform in Portland. Mm-hmm. Those are the kinds of things that are going to change. When you can limit the campaign contributions, or whether it's going to take a change to the, to amend the U.S. Constitution to get rid of Citizens United. It's going to take that kind of activity, and it's not going to happen overnight, but people are going to realize that we don't want billionaires and corporations running our country. That's not what this country is supposed to be about.
You're talking about getting rid of Trump and Trumpenstein and the whole Trump administration.
And a lot of the Democrats. I don't want Pelosi either. I don't want Schumer either. You know, they're just part of the other side of the coin. You know, they just want to have their billionaires and their corporations in charge. But for both of them, they're both going to let the pharmaceutical companies do whatever they want. They're both going to let the insurance companies do whatever they want. They're both going to let the trade policies do whatever they want to allow corporations to send, you know, to use cheapest labor anywhere in the world they can to make more and more profits. Both parties are going to let that happen. It's just which big donors are we going to have running the country? Is it going to be the Koch brothers, or is it going to be the other guys? You know, so that's what has to change. That's what has to happen.
The other guys are us ordinary citizens. Are we going to?
No, yeah, we're the ones that have to take over the government, and it's not a violent overthrow. You know, I sometimes get into discussions with people who, especially younger people who, you know, they consider themselves Marxists, you know, and revolutionaries. And so when I use the word revolution, it's not that kind of a revolution. The revolution is going to happen by people being finally to the point where they're just not going to sit and take it anymore. And they're going to get off their butts and they're going to vote. And we're going to get, the demographics of this country is changing, whether we like it or not. Some people will fight it tooth and nail. The white supremacists are going to fight the change that's happening in this country. We are a country of diversity. We're not a country of, you know, I hate to put it because I'm one of them, you know, the old white males running the country. That's going to change. You know, we'll see how long it takes, but we have to keep pushing. We have to keep, especially some of the old white guys like me, have to stand up and say, I wish I was a young black female. I mean, I would feel much better about my ability to influence, you know, but I'm not.
Then we'll get COINTELPRO involved here. We'll take care of that pretty quickly.
Right. So I'm very optimistic, long term. Not so optimistic, you know, short term. But it's really about moving forward, and the revolution I'm talking about, the political revolution, is happening now. You know, it's not a pipe dream. It is happening now.
What are you tilting at windmills or something here?
I wouldn't.
Dreamer.
I think it's a lot farther down the line than that. I think we are moving much more in a positive direction than people want to give credit to. Yes, I think a lot of people didn't realize how much support Donald had, and that's why he kind of, I won't say he stole the election, but he didn't. People didn't pay attention. You know, you remember, right? You know, even 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the election, she had the polls were ahead, and we were 30% ahead or something ridiculous. You know, so she didn't have to get dirty. She didn't have to. She could just sit back and win in her mind. And I think the American people, if I realize that ain't going to work, you know, we've really got to stand up and fight against racism and a potential fascist dictator. I mean, I that's not too harsh a word. I mean, I think that's where he'd go. You know, he wants this $90 million military parade with missiles going down Pennsylvania Avenue, and you know that's not what we're about. You know,
we'll have a quiet coup. It'll always seem to be a violent overthrow of the existing system. That's how it's always been. Yeah. And it only occurs when people take to the streets or shut down the economic system.
You're absolutely right. Civil rights would not have happened. The gains we've made in civil rights, which now are really being threatened, wouldn't have happened without the people in the street, without the people getting hosed by the police, without the, you know, and quite honestly, without the Black Panthers. You know, there were people that were really fighting and working for what was gained, and now we have to make sure we don't lose all the gains we've made in the, you know, not just in the, you know, the struggle for you know, minority rights, but immigration rights and you know, the LGBT. And there's so many communities that are being threatened, and I think when all those people get together, we have an incredible force to be reckoned with.
And if we get organized, and they see that we're getting organized and having
I know what you're about to say.
Yeah, where I'm going with that. But we got to do it, right? I think about during the Vietnam era, I was living in L.A. and I had 5 daughters, and my wife wasn't nearly as political as I was. And we marched down Rocher Boulevard during the protest parades, and I'd have all my little kids next to me, and I'd be in the middle of the marchers, because then the Hells Angels and the right-wingers would crash from the sides before they'd get to me. So I wonder if it's going to take that kind of a confrontation between the Trumpsters or the right-wingers or the racists to have that kind of a fight or conflict on the streets before things are forced to change. And that you got to affect the money-making capability.
Well, you know what you said, it reminds me a lot of the turning point, I really think, for, in some ways, of ending the Vietnam War was when the Kent State shootings. You know, like you said, sometimes it takes a terrible, horrible thing to get people to realize how bad things have gotten. You know, I fear, like you said, that there's going to be more and more violence as the white supremacists feel continually emboldened by our president, who says there's good guys on both sides, you know, and he legitimizes their perspective. That gets more and more of the protest against them to be more and more visible, more and more vocal, and sadly more and more violent. People have very strong feelings, and you know, it will explode more. Charlottesville is not going to be the last time that we've had that kind of a confrontation in the streets, and hopefully, you know, saner, you know, that we only have to suffer through 2 more years of the Donald, and with the kind of support I think that the progressive arm of this country is going to have, we won't turn the government over, you know, in 2 years, but we'll have a very strong progressive caucus in the Congress, not just, you know, 20 or 30 people in there, but that will be the force, I think, in the Congress, is the progressive caucus in the Congress. That's the first thing I've already pledged to join if I were elected. You know, you've got to get those people together who share the values, and I think we're going to be moving well along that road in 2 years. So
you think Trump is going to still be
I don't know how they can get rid of him.
A leader, you know, before his term is up?
Yeah, I think, and sadly, I don't think there's any way that even the Democrats, if they have an overwhelming, you know, majority in the House, they still have to get 2/3 of the Senate to impeach him, and they're not even going to bother with that because there's no way they're going to get that.
But so things are moving in that direction.
It is moving in that direction, and there will be continuous pressure on the Republican Party to separate ways with him, because they're going to realize in 2020 that if they have any chance of, you know, taking back any sort of influence in the Congress, they're going to have to separate themselves from Donald. But he'll be there. Hopefully he'll be just more like a lame duck, and, you know, as long as he gets 10,000 people in a hangar somewhere to tell him how wonderful he is, he'll be happy. You know? That's all he really wants anyway, is people to tell him how wonderful he is.
So I want to be sure we covered the things that you had in your handout. We talked about the money going into political action committees and corporations, and those are the ones who own the electoral system, and they're the ones who actually run things behind the scene. And I mentioned at one of your gatherings about the deep state, and that seems to be, most people don't know what I'm talking about. And it's another way of saying perhaps the super rich, the people who have all the money and control everything behind the scenes. And there's a deep enough state here where we can guess at, I feel like the Koch brothers.
That's right, that's right.
But the ones who have even more money than that, if that's possible, then they're the ones who, you don't even know their names, but the money, the power is there that controls what goes on. And so it's, you and I are really so far down.
That's right, absolutely right. And there's no question that there are people who are exerting an enormous amount of influence in places that we don't know about.
Okay.
How about in...
you say it so well.
Well, you know, I've been to, there's a big event that happens every year. Actually, I think it's, who's the guy, the Microsoft guy, Bill Allen, who runs this thing out in Sun Valley, Idaho every year. He has a little summer retreat. And Sun Valley, Idaho, you know, it's a very exclusive little resort town.
Yeah.
The airport, there's a little private airport there.
Paul Allen?
Oh, Paul Allen, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And the little airport there is filled with like 30, 40, 50 corporate jets. These big jets come in this little private, shut down the airport. And these people get together, and it's the head of Disney, it's the head of Chase Manhattan Bank. They show up, and they spend 3 days sort of plotting the next year's worth of influence. And that's a lot of what you talk about. People that you probably wouldn't know them. You wouldn't know them if you walked into them in the street. But there is certainly, you know, a lot of influence going on in terms of why are there such huge defense contracts going on? Why are there these infrastructure projects that only feed the rich? You know, why are the banks completely and totally immune from any prosecution?
I have an idea. How about a wealth tax? How about a wealth tax?
Well, there's a lot of good ideas, and there's a lot of good things that should be happening. But as I've said, you know, it's going to take more people getting engaged, and again, that's one of the reasons why, you know, people say, why are you running? It's because we have to. We can't just, those of us who have the opportunity, I don't have a family to support anymore. I don't have to worry about, you know, losing my home, okay? I'm set, I can devote myself to this, and there are people like me who can do that. And those of us who can, if you really care about the future of this country, you know, you don't have to get engaged like I am in terms of running for, you know, office, but you know, you show up, you go on phone banks, you canvass maybe 1 or 2 nights a week for a couple of weeks about the causes you care about. You know, people need to get more and more engaged if we're really going to fix what I can see as some really severe problems.
You got a lot of courage.
Thanks. Mm-hmm. It's not hard. I mean, I'm not visible enough that I have to fear for my life. So, you know, I'm okay as far as that goes. That's right. That's right. You know, like a lot of people.
You're enjoying it, aren't you?
Yeah, it's a great experience, especially like I said at my life, at this time in my life when I have my health, I have my you know, the resources enough to do things. I funded my campaign on my own. I raised about $1,000. That's all. And the rest of the money I spent on my own. And I started out saying this is what budget I would do, and we'll see what happens. And hopefully it sends a message, if nothing else, to like I've been talking to League of Women Voters and, you know, a lot of organizations about trying to at least invite Earl to show up, debate, you know, answer questions, be there, and you know, if we can get enough pressure to just get the, you know, individuals to stand up and say what they believe, maybe that's a good start, you know, because I'm really looking at the next 2 years as well, not just, you know, in the next 7 weeks. Once this election is over, that's really when the next election begins for me, and that really is my goal, is to say, you know, let's do as well as we can right now, and let's really work our ass off for the next time.
Watch your mouth again. And that's
not a bad word. Our butts off. How's that?
Yes, it's better.
That's better.
We have to deal with the management of this whole operation here, and sometimes they're very overly strict.
I will,
on the safe side.
I'll be careful.
But you are right.
Thank you.
Now, we only have a minute or two left. So what do you want to say to the viewers? There's your camera, about anything we've talked about, anything on your mind right now. What happened with our conversation or anything else? You have the floor.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to reach out to voters right now, to just ask them to think about, do you want to have a choice? Do you want to just accept the reality of that we don't have a terrible person? You know, he's not the worst person in the world, but I'd like people to just think about, do I really want more of the same, or do I really want to take a chance and make a real difference? And I think a vote for me will actually send a message that you're not just going to sit back and take take what the party gives you, even if he's not a terrible person. I think you really I just want people to have a choice.
Terrific. Okay, it's been good. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Doc. It's always great to be with you.
Yes, and how about a few public service announcements to show that we still have those? You want to watch my shows on the web, Google Don Baham YouTube, because they're all over the country, and of course on the World Wide Web and YouTube. And to learn more about the Alliance for Democracy, an organization that I belong to, go to the national website at the alliancefordemocracy.org and the Portland, Oregon website at www.afd-pdx.org. And American Civil Liberties Union, oh my God, the ACLU, without the ACLU, we'd be in deeper trouble than we are right now.
Can I make one more comment?
Please.
On September 30th at Laurelhurst Park, it's a little ad here, I'm putting together a free barbecue. I've invited a bunch of organizations, Portland Tenants United, Alliance for Democracy, and other groups are going to be there for a free barbecue and to meet some candidates and to learn some information about progressive groups that people may not know. So
Laurelhurst Park in Portland, Laurelhurst
September
Park.
30th, 12 to 4. Everybody's welcome.
Well, thank you very much. We slipped that in just in time.
Thanks.
All right, anything more we want to see here? How about ending corporate personhood? Yeah. To end corporate personhood, go to move-to-amend.org to talk about money is not speech and corporations are not persons. So thanks again for watching, and remember KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC, kind, friendly, and charitable. Thank you again.
Thank you, sir.
You betcha.